With the NSA.
We have identified some very, very interesting anomalous type of aircraft.
The traffic is quite luminous and is exhibiting some non-ballistic motion. Over.
Move very rapidly at any speed or whether any direction it wanted to go. Flag could change and go to the right or the left or go crossways without hesitating a bit.
What do you think it was?
Well, if they call it a flying saucer, that's what it is.
EWA 517, do you want to report a UFO? Over. Negative. We don't want to report.
Look, it wasn't my worst Wednesday night.
All right, everybody. Welcome aboard. This is Miles Lewis and...
Hey, Mark Jackson, everybody. How we doing, Miles?
I'm doing pretty good, man.
Cool.
So I was had the pleasure of taking a much-needed respite this past weekend. My wife and I were celebrating our 11th wedding anniversary. And
congratulations.
Thank you. We took a brief, much-needed vacay to the beautiful little town of Wimberley, just a little ways here outside Austin, and it was really, really nice to disconnect from everything and see a little bit more new, different environs than we've been sequestered with here. But it was a great time to also catch up on some reading and just decompressing from social media and whatnot. But of course, as soon as I got back in town, right back at it, binge watching stuff that I've been checking out. So really, really glad to be here with you, Mark. How you been?
Good. Same. Got away a little bit this weekend. San Antonio for me. High strangeness in San Antonio. For anybody that's ever been there, ain't nothing changed. Yeah, but I had a great time as well, unplugged momentarily, so to speak, and then rolled right into this week. So I'm with you on that. Hey, man, what did you read? Anything? What stuck out to you that you read over the break?
Well, I've mentioned that I recently got my autographed copy of Ralph Blumenthal's The Believer, the Alien Encounters, Hard Science, and the Passion of John Mack. John Mack being Harvard psychiatrist who in a lot of ways brought legitimacy to the abduction research field. And I'm really, really glad to learn more about him. I'm hoping to maybe we can get Ralph on as a guest at some point. And but I did not really have that full of an understanding of Dr. Mack, and I probably gave him a little short shrift. I mean, I certainly was glad at the time to see somebody with his credentials bringing, like I say, a little bit of legitimacy to the field. But there's just so much more to him. Like with anybody, he has quite an amazing background, and looking forward to talking more about that in the future.
Was John Mack involved with the Zimbabwe case? Am I thinking of the right guy?
The Ariel School.
The Ariel School. Okay, it was the same. Okay.
Yeah, and
excellent.
That's I think we've touched on that before. How that's one of the things that fascinates me about the UFO phenomena is these the class of UFO close encounters involving school children seeing UFOs and entities at schools. I mean, that there's a plethora of examples of this, but that one is in particular has gained a lot more notoriety recently with James Fox's documentary and other research into it. But yes, John Mack was one of the first people on the scene there and interviewing the kids directly. And as critical as I might have been of his handling of those interviews with children, which obviously can be a very delicate situation as an investigator trying not to introduce or lead the witness, part of his history is of having worked with children in his study of nightmares. And so he certainly had a lot more experience in that area than I realized, and than I likely gave him credit for. So definitely going to have more to say about that book and John Mack in the future. Man, so at the beginning, so when I got back from out of town, I discovered that the computer that I usually use for these streams has its main hard drive has crashed and burned, and so I am on a new used separate computer. I'm not sure if that's what's causing it, but during the intro, man, I was hearing the intro music speed up and slow down. It was kind of cool, but it was like, what's the heck is going on? I don't know if that's gonna make it to the recording, but from my end, it was like, well, that's pretty strange. But here we are, and I'm glad that you've joined us, and I'm always glad to talk to you, Mark, about these kinds of subjects. So on another just kind of tangential thing, I've been at the beginning of these shows talking about my finally catching up on so much UFO-related science fiction, and the latest is I finally found an easy way to stream for free the Project Blue Book cable TV series that came out a couple of years ago. I think they've done 2 seasons, and this is the show that is a dramatization based on real events, based on real cases, I think is their tagline, that chronicles the life and explorations of the fantastic of Joseph Allen Hynek, J. Allen Hynek, the astronomer who was a hardcore skeptic, but then as he investigated UFO sightings and close encounters, came to the conclusion that there was really something to it, and it wasn't all just something that could be written off as swamp gas, to use the term that he used in terms of the famous Michigan cases. But anyway, very much enjoying it as a dramatization, a TV show. But man, it's also hard to come to terms with some of the gross inaccuracies and blatant misrepresentations and whatnot. But again, it's a fictionalized version, and I understand that the screenwriters are trying to make it exciting and interesting. So,
Miles, real quick on that, do the writers, directors, etc., the producers, do they take more artistic license with the way that the witnesses or the people behaved, or more do they add on to the actual sort of Blue Book experiences themselves as they were potentially drafted by Hynek?
They really, really take liberties with everything from the specifics of individual cases. They really embellish them and add colorful, fantastical flourishes, whether it's the famous UFO dogfight case or the Flatwoods monster case. And they definitely try to weave in a lot of the other aspects of the UFO field, the competing theories about, I don't think they've used the phrase yet, Majestic 12 or Magic 12, or that whole, that name, and that describes that conspiracy mythos of, government secret programs that know more than they were letting on. But they absolutely weave that stuff in a way that I find so far mostly interesting. But again, it's frustrating because so many people who don't then take the next step of after watching something like this and actually read the truth, the more historical versions of these events, it's easy for them to get misled and develop these sensationalistic versions. They seem to be working in, they've worked in Project Paperclip. They have Hynek involved in a fist fight in a bar on the Nazi base where von Braun was. Just all kinds of things. But the thing is, to my understanding, the son, I forget his name, but the son Hynek, who is very friendly with the UFO community, I believe was fairly closely involved with the development of this project, but maybe I'm misremembering. But fun time so far. We'll see where it goes. I'm only about halfway through the first season. I think there's about 20 episodes total, 10 per season, but we'll see where it goes. But yeah, I think they're incorporating very MK Ultra stuff and lots of espionage and couching it in terms of, the Soviet espionage and so forth. So Meanwhile, UFOs, UAP, as it's now called, are still in the news, and that is going to be the focus of a lot of what we discuss this evening. And most recently, of course, we were talking about these military sightings and encounters with the Navy, both on the East and the West Coast, and their historical context in broader military incursions on land-based bases and whatnot. Meanwhile, we've got this article from over at the Drive. What is the headline there? Navy's top officer says mysterious drones that swarm destroyers remain unidentified. And this is, of course, Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Michael Gilday, the U.S. Navy's top officer. And in that article, it's quoted, asked by Jeff Schogel of Task and Purpose magazine if the Navy had positively identified any of the aircraft involved. Gilday responded by saying, "No, we have not. I am aware of those sightings, and it's been reported there have been other sightings by aviators in the air and by other ships, not only of the United States, but other nations, and of course, other elements within the U.S. Joint Force." He goes on to say those findings have been collected and they still are being analyzed. Gilday added, "I don't have anything new to report, Jeff, on what those findings have revealed thus far, but I will tell you we do have a well-established process in place across the Joint Force to collect that data and to get it to separate repositories for analysis," which, again, we're all anticipating this Department of Defense Navy-led Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, the UAPTF, to give its report allegedly come June 1st, but as we've said, it could very well be delayed.
Now, Miles, they use the term drone. It sounds like you read a little more of it than I didn't get to that one. There was so much on the Flipboard, everybody. Again, it's like, where do you even start? And thanks, Miles. But they're using the term drone. Are we seeing an effort by the military at this point to start shunting the term UAP over to drones and, et cetera? Can we expect more of that? And what's going on with the drone comment versus the the UAP statements that were more direct in the statement, for example, that you read?
My impression would simply be that my take would be that they're giving the impression that, as usual, they want to downplay the use of any terminology that they find objectionable or sensationalistic, and I think, even though, to my understanding, historically speaking, UFO was a Air Force created acronym, it is obviously, over the decades, it has accumulated its own baggage that tends to make people think alien or extraterrestrial spacecraft. UAP, with the main way I've understood that acronym, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, lends to this idea that that it could be some kind of atmospheric phenomena, but they
precisely, yeah.
But really, I think that's not really the way it's being used. It's being used more like structured craft, and I think in some cases I've heard people going so far as to, and I don't think I've seen military sources use this, but say it, and it actually is an acronym for unidentified aerial propulsion or something like that. Or, but I don't think that there's been. I think there's still, drone is obviously a much more useful term within military circles, I think, and I think they're just out of habit going to that, and again trying to downplay any extraordinary aspect of this. But that's at the heart of all these descriptions, is this extraordinary ability to go faster than the speed of sound without the concomitant breaking of the sound barrier or sonic booms. These seemingly impossible aerobatics and extreme turns that would splatter the alleged pilot or occupant on the inside, thus also kind of again implying drone, that maybe these things are not actually piloted. And this whole recurring use of the phrase tic tac just keeps coming up, or what the flying propane tanks, as they've also been described. But interestingly enough, we also just posted to the Flipboard in the last day the latest article from Mystery Wire, which is the website of George Knapp, the Las Vegas journalist who is we've talked a lot about, because he's been at the heart of the revelations about the ATIP program, the Skinwalker Ranch, and the ongoing revelations about all things in between. And it's as often is the case, at least from my perspective, George Knapp is doing a really good job of being a good, diligent journalist and speculating as much as he feels comfortable, but careful to say what is speculation. And but in this latest article are I think 2 new photographs that had been talked about for the last year or so. One of which had been released before, that was I think described as a triangular object. That these are photos that were taken by pilots, I think, with in some cases their iPhones inside the cockpit as they're flying by at, gosh knows, 20, 30 plus thousand feet. And anyway, he addresses that with the one that had been released already has been described and debunked by some skeptics as being a particular Batman inflatable balloon that happens to be triangular shaped. But he also says that the task force does not appear to, from what he's hearing, to consider that to be a good explanation for these. Also, these objects are described as stationary for long periods of time and not being pushed by the prevailing winds, which implies, as several others have commented, that they must have some kind of other radar return or some kind of other evidence, because even a skilled, trained fighter pilot is likely going to have a difficult time of determining whether something that if they're passing by it at a very high speed and it's in the distance, even if it's up close, that it could be difficult to tell whether it's actually moving or not. So, but again, I would tend to take them at their word, since they are the better, more experienced person in that arena. But going on from there, we've got these other articles that are equally interesting, especially this with John Greenwald Jr., who we've mentioned before, and his Black Vault at theblackvault.com has gotten this tremendously awesome hour-long interview with former CIA director James Woolsey. And they talk everything from JFK assassination to UFOs. For those who don't remember, James Woolsey ran the CIA under Bill Clinton from 1993 to 1995. And he's basically out on the lecture circuit promoting the new book that he co-authored, Operation Dragon: Inside the Kremlin's Secret War on America. And lo and behold, so much of his commentary, whether it be about the JFK assassination, which they talk about quite a bit, to just the current state of the world in general, it's all Russia, 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 Russia. And certainly we all know that Russia has long been the scapegoat, and rightfully so in many cases, for agents of disinformation. But he really goes out on a limb. Well, I don't know. I haven't read the book, but apparently it's in the book. The description of which says former Director of Central Intelligence R. James Woolsey and former Romanian acting spy chief Lieutenant General Ian Mihai Pacepa, who was granted political asylum in the U.S. in 1978, describe why Russia remains an extremely dangerous force in the world, and they finally and definitively put to rest the question of who killed President Kennedy on November 22d.
And you said they had a book that was coming out too, right?
Yes, that's Operation Dragon: Inside the Kremlin's Secret War in America. It appears to be, I think it's out right now. And yeah, he's full on. He's like, look, the Kremlin had their sights on the president, and at the last minute had pulled back their efforts to assassinate him. But Lee Harvey just went still full tilt bore forward, and of course is the lone assassin. And they didn't really get into specifics, but he specifically said it wasn't the mafia, it wasn't the CIA, it wasn't the U.S. Marine Corps, and it wasn't Texas oilmen. He specifically said all of those things. So he hit the main conspiracy theories, and he went so far again to just say that so much of the conspiracy theory surrounding the assassination of JFK were fomented by Russia. And again, I certainly, whenever I hear that kind of thing, my knee-jerk reaction is to, yes, and so do we. We have been actively engaged in a psy war, disinfo war against each other for a long time. But anyway,
well, I'm skeptical, Miles, that you can unpack the CIA from Texas oil men. You so comfortably unpack the CIA from the Marines. I mean, and the fact that this guy only served 2 years under Bill Clinton, of all people, who serve at the pleasure of the president through appointeeship, et cetera. Is he really privy to all the information from the last 60, 70 years? Or is he being spoon-fed information from the Texas oilmen? I don't know. That's for us to kind of try to navigate through. But easily compartmentalized information always throws flags up for me, just saying.
Yes, and he does describe going down into the vaults to try to research these things. And he talks about how he and his co-author have been investigating this for so long. Very interesting, though. Very worthwhile interview. I'm very suspicious of anybody at that level of power in the CIA, even if it was only for a couple of years, regardless of what administration they were under. But very interesting stuff. There's also this quote from the interview, and this is actually getting some traction in not the most reputable of mainstream press outlets, but, quote, there was one case in which a friend of mine was able to have his aircraft stop at 40,000 feet or so and not continue operating as a normal aircraft, Ambassador Woolsey explained while recounting one UFO encounter he was aware of. I'm not as skeptical as I was a few years ago, to put it mildly, but something is going on that is surprising to a series of intelligent aircraft experienced pilots, he said, and we will just have to see what it is. In other words, referencing again this upcoming task force report. But this mentioning of this 40,000 feet air encounter, man, did my camera go out? Really? That is so weird. Oh, did I press the...
There we go.
Sorry, folks. I must be pressing buttons here accidentally. You get to see the pulsing wedding photo of myself from 10 years ago or 11 years ago. But it's interesting. So we've got NewYorkPost.com, TheSun.com, DailyCaller.com, and other websites. Again, not the most reputable, but the New York Post has been doing a lot of coverage of this unfolding UFO drama. This is all very interesting to me, and they, the headlines are mostly ex-CIA director believes UFOs could exist after Powell's plane paused. Ex-CIA boss says he believes UFOs may exist after plane pause at 40,000 feet. It's interesting, they did not go into detail about this case, and whatever case this is, he does not name who it is. He just says it's somebody he trusted. And he doesn't give the specifics. It's implied that there was a UFO, UAP involved, but there's really no specifics. We don't even know when this occurred, or what he means by, that
operating as a normal aircraft,
right? And stopped at 40,000 feet. But it's tantalizing. But it's at this point just what we call a folk tale, friend of a friend. A story, folklore, what most of these UFO cases are, except when we have those hardcore case files and various evidentiary aspects, whether it be instrumented corroboration, like with radar and so forth. But very interesting interview. I definitely encourage folks, if you're interested, to check it out. There's a couple of other interesting bits, not least of which was Greenwald asking about a famous situation where Stephen Greer, famous UFO personality who has long made claims of having briefed various presidents and presidential cabinet members or military officials, and Woolsey is one of those. He's long maintained that he briefed, and there's apparently been some controversy to this, but basically Greenwald asked, and interestingly enough, Woolsey said, yes, it's true. I did meet with the doctor, and he seemed like a credible sane, person with very compelling information, but he also specified that this was after he had left his role as head of the CIA. But then he ended with, I would love to talk with him again if you wanted to facilitate that, more or less, to paraphrase. So,
and Miles, wasn't the Majestic 12 part of the documents that Greer claims it at one point circulated through Woolsey's office and then came back out? He went kind of on the circuit saying that this was substantiated in some part or partially from the office he occupied at that time, from when he did interview him. I believe that's the case.
Well,
fact check me on that, folks.
No,
but
yeah,
I know that was one of the topics that came out of it. Woolsey backpedaled. Greer held tight to that. And then there was just a ton of back and forth about those documents that were supposedly talked over, but heavily redacted between the copy that Woolsey was given as it gone through mediation to get to him and the copy that was originally supplied to him by Greer. That's my recollection of it. Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. And one of the things at the Black Vault, we'll put the links up to everything we're talking about tonight in the show notes, in the blackvault.com link, where you can see the video, but also read more about this. John gives the links to the Stephen Greer website, where they have scans of some of that communication back and forth between them. So maybe some of that is revealed in that documentation. Yeah. And as far as the Majestic stuff goes, I've never been, I grew up believing that, but I've long since felt like that seemed like a disinformation operation, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't have a kernel of truth. Certainly if there are these things falling out of the skies the way these crash saucers apparently do, the United States military and intelligence complex would want their hands on them and would be utilizing all information they can gain from it to their own advantage. So meanwhile, there's a couple of other UFO articles we could briefly mention. I already mentioned the George Knapp one over at mysterywire.com. Our astronomer friend, Chris Rutkowski, Canadian Chris Rutkowski, has been interviewed over at ChrisD.ca. That's CHRISD.ca. Headline: Survey says Canadians have seen more UFOs during pandemic. Well, yeah, remember we had Chris on as a guest back in October of 2020 on this very show, and he expounded upon the fact that there was a lot of news coverage, and in that show we talked about the astronomy.com article headline: Reports of rising UFO sightings are greatly exaggerated, by Eric Betts, to which Chris had penned his "No need to exaggerate numbers" of UFO reports at his blog, uforum.blogspot.com. That article he concluded back in November with: the facts are that UFO report numbers have increased during the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. Whether there is a causal relationship between the pandemic and objects appeared in the sky remains to be seen. But it is dramatic to note that in this most recent article, which of course Chris Rutkowski has released his annual Canadian UFO survey, which you can find at, I believe, survey.canadianuforeport.com. Again, we'll post all the links to this. Chris Rutkowski said sightings of UFOs across Canada increased by 46% in 2020. I mean, my gosh, that's nearly a 50% increase. That's very interesting. And again, is it just as simple as, well, people have more time because they're not at their day jobs, because they're sequestered at home? Maybe. That seems Occam's razor, perhaps, the simplest explanation. But very curious, and I'm so glad that, again, that there's somebody like Chris out there collecting these reports and doing the boring work of collecting and publishing this stuff, so that those of us and himself and others can really dive into it if they want and try to find more information within that effort. Oh, and we might as well promote. Let's go ahead. You can help make the archives that Chris Rutkowski is donated to his university there, the University of Manitoba. You can help make the archives available by going to that link that we'll provide, where they are taking funds to help digitize his materials and make them forever preserved for all and sundry. So always glad to support those kind of archival preservation-oriented efforts. So much more that we could touch on. I just briefly wanted to mention Nick Redfern's brief article, "The Mothman Prophecies Movie and the Chernobyl Disaster of April 1986. What's the Truth?" It's another series I've started watching, but my God, it's just so depressing. The Chernobyl miniseries. But of course, in 2002, when the Mothman Prophecies movie was released, and I love this movie. I think it's actually one of the better adaptations of a book I've ever seen. But it introduces a bunch of bullshit. It introduces all kinds of things that, while interesting and you can see where it kind of comes from, are just not true. And I think, where Lauren Coleman has done his part, Nick Redfern quotes Lauren Coleman from some time back. "John Keel and I openly discussed with the media and did our best to straighten out the record regarding the mythos that became the Chernobyl Mothman accounts. The Chernobyl story, the Galveston Hurricane Mothman tie-in, and other examples given in the 2002 movie were pure fiction. But what's confounding is that in one of my favorite editions of the Mothman Prophecies, the republished Illuminate Press version from 1991, which features one of my favorite covers, not my favorite Mothman Prophecies cover, but it's a Frazetta cover. In that edition, there is an afterword by John Keel himself, where he says, "History does repeat itself, and in the 1980s, the Soviet Union was suddenly engulfed with UFOs and monsters in a classic repetition of what happened in the USA in the 1950s and 60s. As in the great American wave of those decades, it all seemed to have very important meanings, and the innumerable events were subject to all kinds of interpretations, ranging from the occult and religious to the scientific and the cosmic. Bright lights were haunting Soviet atomic plants, and hundreds of remote little Russian towns were plunged into the same kind of Twilight Zone horror that once gripped Point Pleasant." You can kind of see where some folks might take that to the next step. I wonder, though, if that 2002 film, because he mentions how a number of websites at the time started taking up and posting alleged accounts of Mothman being seen at Chernobyl and elsewhere, if that may have been viral marketing, ARG marketing, that is so plagues us now, where movie production companies actually will go so far as to create fake websites or utilize existing real websites and plant fake news and information to weave into reality tidbits that give us an immersive experience of the movie. In the case of, I forget the exact name of the movie, but famous actresses in it. I think it's called Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind or something like that. It's a science fiction horror movie, suspense thriller kind of movie. And the producers of that had to pay, I don't know if reparations is the right word, but they had to. They were ordered by the courts to pay damages because they had done exactly that. They had planted false news stories about missing people and abductions in Alaska and other places. Again, blurring the lines between fact and fiction, which is so easy to do now in this post-truth era.
And let's remind all these, if there's younger folks out there that don't remember the early days of the internet, the phenomena that Smiles is talking about was not devoid of the early internet. Just as much of these old marketing tactics that were in print long before they ever were the internet. Remember, they were deployed immediately upon release of the internet. So there's no purity to the early internet in any sense. And so anyway, that's got to be mentioned because there are folks out there that don't remember those early days. But those sort of campaigns were, unfurled in full force, just like they were in print long before that.
Well, before we wrap up the show, again, you can always go to anomalyarchives.org. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and at the website, anomalyarchives.org, you can see over in the sidebar the link to our Flipboard account where we have these and many, 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 many more news articles on all things strange, anomalous, and mysterious. We've got links to an article that our volunteer, Victor, really wanted us to talk about. Meet the forgotten female artist behind the world's most popular tarot deck. This, of course, is about the artist Pat Coleman Smith. And man, I didn't realize that she's a synesthete. She is someone who experienced synesthesia. And that most common tarot deck that people think of, those images, that was her artwork. And she's a fascinating character. And I remember the wonderful talk by my friend Michael M. Hughes, who gave a talk on tarot for the Streamathon. You can go to our YouTube channel and you can find the archive of that show, or that archive of his lecture. And he mentions her, of course, because she's quite historic in this context, and the interesting the mystery of her ethnicity and sexual orientation. Not that needs to be anybody's focus, but it is of interest to many people trying to understand the history and life of this interesting personage. And meanwhile, we've got other links, including some great journalism related stuff, like talks with Daniel. It's kind of a talk about whistleblowing in the news and journalism, like Daniel Ellsberg, the whistleblower who leaked the Pentagon Papers. And it's a fantastic hour-long back and forth between Peter Kuznick, professor of history at American University in Washington, D.C., Catherine Gunn, a British whistleblower who exposed U.S. efforts to browbeat other nations into supporting George Bush's 2003 invasion of Iraq. One of my favorite, Peter Dale Scott, retired professor, former Canadian diplomat, and a prolific author on the deep state. And UT's own James Galbraith, professor of government at the University of Texas, son of the late author John Kenneth Galbraith, and Aaron Good, who teaches at Quaker High School in Pennsylvania and holds a doctorate in Temple University. There's a great just back and forth about them talking about the importance of whistleblowing in our culture. And to balance that out, Kolchak, the Night Stalker. TheGuardian.com has a very fun description of one of my favorite old series. It was well before my time. I was so glad and excited to finally catch up on this several years ago. The article over at TheGuardian.com, Kolchak, the Night Stalker, pulpy midnight movie tales that almost make journalism seem cool. Spawned from a popular pair of TV movies based on a then unpublished novel by Jeffrey Grant Rice. Hollywood veteran Darren McGavin, who's best known for playing father to Candice Bergen's Murphy Brown and Adam Sandler's Billy Madison, aged 52 at the time, reprised the title role from those two movies. He also was in one of my favorites as a child, Hangar 18. And it had a lot of people behind it, creative writers, Sopranos creator David Chase and Oscar-winning filmmaker Robert Zemeckis both got their starts here, while revered author Richard Matheson, author of I Am Legend, penned the novel-to-movie adaptation that sparked the series. So much more. There's going to be an upcoming lecture by Rice University's Jeffrey Kripal, the superhumanities, what they are, and why parapsychology is so important to them. Again, all the links are going to be in the show notes for tonight. Just there's so much great stuff over at the Flipboard that you can access through anomalyarchives.org. So we could use your help. There's so many ways you can donate. You can go to our website, and there are links there to our Facebook donation platform, PayPal, or other charity-oriented giving platforms. So thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in or listening to the archive, whether it be the video or the audio podcast. Any last word?
Another great update, Miles. And again, if folks are reading through this in the morning, again, this is all consolidated by the archives and by Miles and the volunteers, et cetera, ahead of time. It's kind of one-stop shopping. So if you value that, please give us a little bit of support. I know I do. I value it every single week. And as always, Miles, is very appreciated by myself, and I'm sure a bunch of others.
Well, thank you very much. And hey, check out this great poster and merch over at our store. Good night.
Hey.
Behold the Anomaly Archives poster. Gaze upon its magnificence. But please keep it down, for there is Shashi the alien Do not be alarmed. But who is that mysterious MIB digging deep into the files? Steady your gaze. Patty the cryptid is elusive, and to catch even a faint glimpse is quite an achievement. Thrill at the horror of a living challenged apparition who has stopped by to study a forgotten tome. Elsewhere, scattered about, the keen eye will observe artifacts of sacred and forgotten lore. After a long gaze one may grow envious and wish to possess a physical manifestation of this grand visage. What once seemed like an insurmountable expedition is now made into an effortless side quest. For now,